There we go. Right, bit of background on me. I've been, as Pete said, I've been with Touchstone for 25 years. Background in finance systems, now procurement systems, always on the technical side, so from a development, now integration, so that's where I come from. So today we're going to talk a couple of different topics, but they do link together. So we're going to talk about cloud computing, what it is, how you can move to it if you're not already in it. Then we're going to move on to integrations as well, and integrations from a procurement background, if you like. So, what's cloud computing? So, cloud computing is the delivery of on-demand services, usually over the internet. Those services to storage, to processing power. Typically how they work, you're looking at, excuse me. That's the wrong slide. There we go. There we go. So, typically how they work. So instead of owning your own infrastructure, but in a normal on-premise solution, you're renting those services out from a cloud provider. So that cloud provider could be an Amazon, could be Microsoft, could be Google. Massive companies with massive amounts of processing power behind them. So the advantage to them, they can then share all that computing power out over multiple users, multiple customers, multiple services, kind of a multi-tenant environment. The advantage to you as customers, if you like, is that you no longer need to buy that infrastructure. So that all that upfront cost and complexity of owning hardware and maintaining the hardware, it's no longer your worry. And then, why is it called cloud computing? So, as an oversimplification, it's called cloud based on the service you're buying is largely irrelevant of where that is actually based. So the services, the hardware, everything behind it, doesn't matter where it is. So the term is borrowed from the old telecoms schematics, where the network, the telephone network and the internet was donated as a cloud in the schematics, just because it was just a cloud of stuff. It didn't matter what it was, where it was. Obviously, no oversimplification. In terms of IT, you need to know where that data is. It's quite important nowadays. Different types of cloud. So public cloud is one of these where, as I mentioned, you've got your Amazon, you've got your Microsoft. Massive companies with massive economies of scale. So they can easily scale up. If all of a sudden you need a lot more processing power to develop an application, or you're using it a lot more heavily, easily scale up. A private cloud has got some of those benefits in terms of economy of scales, but that's hidden behind your corporate firewall. So the security around that is you know where your data is, you know how it's being handled, it's all in your network. But then the downside of that is you don't have the same economy of scale. You don't have that power of Microsoft. You can't suddenly scale up 15 new servers very quickly. And the hybrid cloud, it's a bit of this, bit of that, bit of both of those. Some software with one SaaS vendor, some with another. Typically where we all are at the moment. So we've got things all over the place. So then we look at the different services that we can offer, the different models that we've got within a cloud. So we've got, the acronyms are IaaS or IaaS, PaaS and SaaS, as we know them. So if we bring up an on-premise solution, the old way of doing things where everything's in the network, we can look at, these are things that you typically manage when it's on-premise. Everything on here you manage, from the applications down to the operating systems, the physical or virtual servers, all that's managed internally. When we move on to infrastructure as a service, we're looking at the physical side of the network and all the virtual side of the network. The servers are now managed elsewhere, up in the cloud. But you've still got that luxury of being able to configure all of that information yourself, put the operating system on, deploy your own applications, as long as you've got the skills in-house to do that. The next level up, which is more of a development platform, if you're developing apps or if you've got your own apps internally that you want to actually deploy, is a platform as a service. So everything is managed for you in terms of the servers, the runtime, the operating systems. All you're deploying is your applications, your binaries on top, so users can use them. And the final one is a SaaS model, where everything is up in the cloud. You don't have to manage anything. It's normally on a per seat or per user basis over the internet. You use that access that way. So looking at in a bit more detail, so infrastructure as a service. So examples of infrastructure as a service are, say, the Azure Web Services, your Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services. So platform as a service, a few examples of those are Google App Play, and I think it's, I will get the name of this one wrong, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, I think is another one that's called. Not quite sure where the name came from, but another one that's up there. And software as a service is typical one we all know. That's your Outlook or 365, that's your Salesforce, your NetSuite, Anywhere, Practice in some cases. So then we need to look at, are you ready to actually move to the cloud? Now, what is the business requirement? Does the business actually have a cloud-first strategy? Is there a need that IT has said, right, everything needs to go in the cloud, we need to relinquish responsibility for the hardware behind this? There's benefits to that. I mean, should IT be responsible for all your applications? Should they know all your applications? You've got a vast number of applications across an organisation. Is it up to them to be able to understand those, manage those, support those? Possibly not. And there's an IT requirement sometimes as well in terms of, is there an InfoSec requirement? Are there certain accreditations that you need to follow to be able to store that data? Is there a software vendor requirement? Is your software within current support? Are you patching regularly? And are there any cost constraints or restraints? Ultimately, most things come down to cost, as we all know. So, looking at some of those requirements, we then need to think about choosing which cloud is the right cloud to choose for us. So as mentioned first, there is a cloud strategy. If there is a cloud strategy, it doesn't matter where that cloud is. Of course it does. You need to know where your data is. You need to know if it sits within the UK, for example, or the EU. You need to know where the data is being held and looked after, and it's being managed responsibly. The people managing it have got all the accreditations to manage that data. When you're getting ready for the cloud as well, you need to get buy-in from the business. You've got to set the expectations for the whole business of what we're trying to achieve. You need to get the roles and responsibilities right. You need to explain to people. It's not just an IT-led project. It affects so many people when you're moving applications to the cloud. They all need to buy into it. They all need to understand where they sit in this, the decision-making process, what they might gain, what they might lose. Some of the other benefits. So reduce CapEx. So you no longer have the cost of the servers, the physical infrastructure. You don't have to worry about disposing of that infrastructure when it expires. So typically you're moving your cost from CapEx over to OpEx because you're buying that software as a service now. You've got no server maintenance costs. You don't own the servers anymore. I mean, typically hardware has got a lifetime of 3 to 5 years. So you're refreshing hardware every 3 if it's on premise. After 5 years, it becomes very expensive to maintain. So you don't have to worry about this if it's all up in the cloud. Reduce software maintenance cost. If you can move your applications up to a cloud where the vendors know the applications, so an iValue or a Touchstone cloud, they can look after that software for you. They know the software. You don't have to get your IT team trained up on managing and patching that software. The partner can do it for you. And obviously with the benefits of the cloud, people expect cloud to be available 365, 24/7. That's what the cloud should be doing. This gives us the flexibility and the continuity, flexibility and scale. We've got that bit from being able to expand servers very quickly. If you've got a new application you want to test, you want to bring on board on the system, you can spin up a new server very quickly. You don't have to go out and buy a new server anymore and configure it. Spin one up, test the application out. If it works, fantastic. If it's suddenly wildly popular, spin a few more servers up. It's very simple to do. A few more benefits. Transferring the ownership and responsibility of the applications and the servers. You don't have to worry anymore about looking after this. That's the partner's problem. Why should you take on the risk of those servers and those applications? Let the partner do that. That's what you're paying them for. A viable upgrade path. Simon mentioned in his last session about an ERP solution coming to end of life. Is that the right time to get a new solution, move that into the cloud? Is it the right time to do it? Are you going through a big patching process? Should we be looking at moving to the cloud at the same time as part of that process? So the idea is that the whole system is worry-free. Now, nothing is ever worry-free, obviously, but if we can pass all that worry up to the provider, all the better for us. So the last statement I want to leave on the cloud side of things. It's no longer a decision whether to leverage cloud computing, but which technology to choose. It's the way the world's going. Most of us are going there in one form or the other already, whether it be Outlook or our finance systems. We still have a lot of things on premise. It is all going to move. We're going to have to. It's the way that we need to manage things going forwards. So that was just touching on cloud very quickly. I hope it helps a little bit. What I want to move on to, and was my background really, is the integration side of things. So when we're going through, this is integration from a procurement basis. Let's think of this when we're talking about procurement systems that we're selling and how we're integrating into other systems. So we think of it as 4 main questions. Now, what are we integrating? Why are we integrating it? How are we integrating? How often do we integrate it? So on the what side, what solutions do we integrate with? Typically on 99% of our projects, we're integrating with an ERP solution. Now that ERP solution is going to be involving static data, transactional data. We want to keep things in sync. When we're looking at data providers, we're reaching out to third-party providers to pull data down to enhance the experience in the application. We'll reach out to somebody like a Moody's or a D&B. We'll pull down risk information. We'll show users in the application more data about their suppliers, keep them better informed about should they be working with that supplier. Good or bad information. Data validation. So we reach out to third-party providers to validate the data as it's being entered. So it's especially important if you're using supplier portals. Suppliers are entering their own data, you want to make sure what they're entering is valid. Similarly users, but you need to make sure the data being captured is valid. So that could be anything from validating bank details up against the bank detail software, it could be validating company registration numbers, could be validating VAT numbers, making sure what's entered is valid. That data can be validated on a schedule as well. You're not just doing it as a one-off when it's being entered. You could be constantly looking at that data and say, well, let's look at company's house. Is the company still active? If it's not active, we need to let somebody know. We can start cleansing our data, our supplier data, if that's the case. So another one that is coming up quite often are user authentication, so a single sign-on. So it's inbuilt into most of the applications we sell. And when we configure it, it means that users can access the system. More importantly, when they leave the organization, they can no longer access it automatically. There's no reason to go in there and delete them. Single sign-on stops you from logging in. And that also leads on to the provision side of things. So that's your JML procedures, joiners, movers and leavers. So as large organizations, they will have a large turnaround of staff. You want to automate that process. So if a user joins, let's automatically create them a system. If they move department, let's change the cost centers around in the system automatically. If they leave, let's reassign tasks that they had open to other users. If we can automate as much of that, we're taking a lot of the work away from the admins. Still some things they'll need to do, but we can automate a lot of that process. So when we look at the solution that we integrate with, we also then look at each touch point within each solution. Now, with some solutions like an ERP solution will have multiple touch points. So when we're looking at static data, we'll look at suppliers, we'll look at analysis codes, we'll look at GL codes, we're looking at transactional data, so invoices, accruals, anything we're passing across to a finance system. Some of these touch points exist in multiple different providers. So for example, exchange rates. If we're pulling exchange rates into the system, should we go out to a WANDA, an XE? Should we pull them from the finance system? Multiple different sources that through the decision-making process we have to decide what's the best one for that particular piece of data. It might be your finance system only changes exchange rates once a month, but you want them more frequently in your ERP, your procurement system. Let's go out to a provider that does that daily. So again, decision-making data, so things like risk scores and credit scores. So we'll pull those down from providers and we'll pull those down on a schedule. So we'll monitor those suppliers with those third-party solutions. When that credit data changes, we'll pull that data down, we'll notify users that their suppliers, either credit scores gone up, gone down, the risk scores gone up or gone down as well. Then we need to understand what the source system is for each of those touch points. Normally it's pretty obvious. So if you've got a supplier portal coming into on the procurement side, your suppliers are going to manage there and be pushed out to other systems. But if you haven't got the supplier portal, you might start your supplier's life in an ERP system, and that becomes the master for suppliers. So going through the design process, we have to work out where this source system is for each touch point. One thing I didn't put on the bottom there is bidirectional integrations. So we try and avoid these where possible. So where you've got two systems that are considered both the master for a piece of data. So if you've got two systems that are updating suppliers and creating them, you've got to then consider contests. If they both update the same supplier at the same time, which one wins? You've still got to have a master behind the scenes. Something we try and avoid. Then we ask the question of why we're integrating. So this is where we draw on our experience as a consultancy thing, that we will challenge you about why we're integrating certain things. We've got to understand what the benefits will provide. Normally the benefit is everything's in sync all the time. Fantastic, brilliant. But if something doesn't change very often, do we need to integrate it? Your chart of accounts, for example, how often do you actually add a new nominal code into your chart of accounts? Is it once a month, once a year? It's very infrequently. Why integrate it? Why not do that manually? Is that effort better spent in getting the manual processes working better? So that a case in point, are we overcomplicating the solution? We don't want to integrate things if they don't need to be. Sorry, Pete, I'm not trying to talk us out of work. But we want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And we've got years of experience in understanding these integrations and doing the various different products. We kind of know what's the best thing to do. And the last one is, it kind of falls into the why category, but are there any changes expected in your environment? Are you planning on changing your finance system, upgrading your finance system, moving the finance system to the cloud? All of that impacts how integrations were designed. If things are going to happen year 2 down the line, fine, we can come back and revisit it. If it's going to happen in the next few months, we need to decide how we're going to design those integrations. Then we look at how the integrations work. So the first thing we need to think about is we've got in the basic scenario, we've got two solutions that want to talk. If they're both SaaS, fantastic. If they're both on-premise, even better. We know they can talk. If you've got one in the cloud, one on-premise, starts being complications. Can the SaaS product talk directly to your on-premise solution? More often than not, you don't want it to, because that's hidden behind the firewall. You don't want to expose that system out to the internet. So then we have to think about, do we have middleware in the middle that manages that process? We also have to think about the solutions themselves. Do they contain their own integration suites? So if we look at an SAP or an iValuer, they've got an integration layer without the product. So the integrations can be hosted in those solutions, and they can manage them. So once we go through that kind of decision-making process, which normally involves the system architects, it will normally involve the third parties, because we'll need to talk to them and understand their APIs. We can decide on the middleware. So if middleware is required, we then got to decide what middleware, where the middleware sits. So typically on a old-fashioned practice and Sun integration, that would have been an SSIS. That sits on the SQL Server, it's part of SQL, there's no cost, brilliant, that can host the integrations. When we're talking SaaS, it might work if one of them's on-premise, because you've got the SQLs sat there on-premise as well, we can utilize that. When two are on the SaaS model, and none of them have got any integration capabilities within them, we need middleware. Now that middleware could be Azure, using Service Bus. That integration could be a Boomi or a SnapLogic. So middleware products are out there. All pretty much like for like. All provide the same kind of integrations, just do it slightly differently. But the idea is that they host the integrations. They manage any errors, and it does all the work for you. And lastly, we need to worry about, do we transform data? So a good example is on a finance system. You'll have tax codes in your finance system. You'll have tax codes in your procurement system. They might not match because you don't want them to. Users might understand those differently. We have to transform that data. If we're transforming it, where do we hold that transformation? Is that held in the middleware if there is middleware? Is it held in one or either solution? Whatever we do, we have to make sure we design that transformation so that you can maintain it. We don't want that hidden away behind some piece of code somewhere where you need to get us to come back and change it. Sorry again, Pete, doing ourselves out of work. We want you to be able to manage these integrations. Now, we're there to partner with you. We don't want to be taking money off you unnecessarily. Then the last one is the frequency. So how often should integrations run? So fantastic if everything can run in real time. So if everything's integrating as it happens, that'd be brilliant. Typically you can't have that. If you're going to synchronize everything in real time, your servers are going to grind to a halt. You're going to kill your SaaS solution. You're going to be spinning up new servers just to keep it up to date. So you have to look at what's the right thing to do. So real time, normally you want transactions going to real time. You want things going across your finance system when they need to be paid. You want accruals going across, not necessarily real time, but at least frequent enough so you can report on them. But the rest of the integration you can probably schedule. All have different schedules. So payments you might only schedule once or twice a week when a payment run happens in the finance system. Exchange rates you might schedule daily because that's when they're changing the source system. There we go. I think Christina pinched these slides earlier on, but so these are a couple of things that we integrate with. So in the middle we've got our spend management software, be it Practice, be it iValuer. So these are the few of the partners that we work with. So down at the bottom there are ERP systems. So these are all the ones that we've learned to an extent. Some of them we know inside out. So GP is not on there because it's going end of life, but we know that one inside out. Enforce on systems, we know that one inside out. We've worked with that for years. A lot of these other ones are new over the past 3-4 years. We've had to learn them as a team. We've had to learn the APIs. But that's all we need to learn to understand how the APIs work. And then we work with that partner to make sure what's actually appearing in that system is what they expect to appear. The partners we've got at the top, these are our providers for data and validation. So we've got things like your company's house, we've got CreditSafe, we've got SEDEX and Moody's. So all of these are partners of providing data to our systems. Skim, for example, that's something Rich has worked on. That's your identity management and user provisioning. So that's some APIs that allow us to bring users in and manage them as and when they change. And another view of the same data, just that they all point into the procurement system. And then, how do we help as TSM? So we've been doing integrations, I did ask the team, I think in total we've got around 90 to 100 years of experience between us all. I'll take credit for 25 of those, I'm not going to portion the rest out. But we get involved now from pre-sales all the way through to delivery. So it's a concept that's changed over the last few years. But previously we'd just be given the work, so that's what you've got to integrate without knowing if we could do it or not. Now we get involved from the start. So you've seen us in design sessions, we'll get involved right from the start. We understand therefore what you want, what we can and can't do, and we can help you make those decisions right at the start, rather than turning around saying, actually you can't integrate to that, there's no APIs. I think that pretty much covers everything I want to talk about. I know I've gone through it very quickly, and I do talk very quickly, so I will say, is there any questions?